Before I start off this review, I would just like to thank Utopia for actually sending this over to me to actually check out early and let you guys know if this film is worth a watch. This film is called Red Rooms, and it will be coming to New York on September 6th in theaters, and I believe it's going to have a wider release later on, and then I'm sure it's eventually going to have a VOD release as well. But ultimately, is this film even worth a watch? Well, stick around and let's talk about it. Red Rooms is about the high-profile case of a serial killer who has just gone to trial and a woman named Kelly who is obsessed with the said killer. The film stars Juliette Gariépy, Laurie Babin, Elizabeth Locus, Maxwell McCabe-Lokos, and was directed by Pascal, Plante, and I've never seen any of his previous works. So with Red Rooms, I didn't know anything about this film. I got the screener for this film. I didn't read a synopsis at all. I didn't watch a trailer. I had no idea who was actually in this film. All I knew is that this film was actually in French with English subtitles, so I was like, you know what, I will definitely give it a chance. There are some languages where they speak really fast and it feels like it's really tough to really grasp what they're saying. It can feel kind of overwhelming, but with the French language, I think that it flows really well, and the fact obviously that it has English subtitles, I'll definitely check it out. So with this film, I can say this, it starts off in a courtroom, and you have this girl named Kelly who is going to this trial for this guy who has actually murdered 3 young girls. And right off the bat, when they're actually in this courtroom, I actually really relate to that. About 6 days ago, I actually had to do jury duty, and I had to actually be in a courtroom. I was on the jury. I had to decide someone's fate. And as soon as they start this film off, they're in the courtroom, and immediately I'm comparing when I was actually in an American courtroom versus the fact that this is in a Canadian courtroom, because this took place in Montreal. And immediately I'm looking at the plaintiff, looking at the defendants, and they start off with this film and they start having the statements of the plaintiff and they have the statements of the defendant, which is exactly what I experienced in my type of situation. So it was really great to see that relatability. There was an audience obviously watching the trial. In my case, there really wasn't, but I was hearing witnesses and such. There's not really a lot of witnesses that we actually hear from. The trial, it's mainly within the first half an hour of this film, and then it kind of gets later revisited. We hear a little bit from a mom in which obviously she is the victim of her daughter actually being murdered, and then we see the murderer. He's in this box. We see him very emotionless, which I've actually experienced as well in the type of case that I actually did. It wasn't a murderer, but it was somebody that was a felon, and he actually had a lot of arrests prior. With the film taking place about 40 minutes in the courtroom, it also takes about an hour and 10 minutes outside of the courtroom as well, and we follow a character named Kelly and also a character named Clementine. Now Clementine we actually meet at the trial. She comes out of this courtroom and she's very persistent that this killer is definitely innocent. She believes that they are crazy, that they actually don't really have enough evidence to actually prove that this guy actually tortured and killed these 3 girls. And I will say this, that this isn't a graphic movie, but you can definitely tell within the sounds and some of the weapons that were actually used, because you do hear it, and obviously you see like the shocking type of gestures that we see from the audience obviously in the courtroom, and then also the fact of these 2 women who are actually hearing about these tapes, watching them, but we actually don't experience them, but we definitely know that the murders were definitely brutal. So we follow Kelly, who is somebody that is a fashion model, I believe. She seems like she really has her life together. She seems pretty normal. Clementine, she seems more on the lower tier end. She's homeless. She definitely doesn't have a lot of money, and that's very true because Kelly actually lends her money when they actually go out to eat. And we see them really bond together, but they're definitely totally opposite of each other. And what I really did like about this film is it's definitely a character study. It is a slow burn film, but it's very interesting to me to see how Kelly actually develops as a character, her obsession for this serial killer, and her really studying this trial, looking stuff up online, really looking up to see the different videos and such that are happening. And there's a third videotape that actually wasn't released, and then there's some different things going on the dark web in which it really gets very creepy, I would say. And some individual here that obviously is very obsessed with the case, some of the things she does is kind of shocking. I definitely didn't expect it out of her character. She seems like a normal person, and she really goes off the deep end, which was really interesting to actually see. The sound design of this film was also pretty well done as well. I think at points there is some creepy points where which the sound really helps elevate certain scenes in this film. It's not a film where anything is really looking to jump out at you. It's not a bloody film, but it's a very interesting film with its sound design. The music here, it's not really a lot in this film, but in certain portions of the film, I do think it does help from transitioning from scene to scene. There is some interesting filtering in this, and I think that the camera shots and how it's actually filmed as a whole, I think it's done rather well. I think for a more artsy kind of film, this is obviously getting a lot of buzz in the artsy community, and I think this is a film that if you really do like character studies, you can really enjoy this film. Now, as far as negatives for this film, what I would say is from a pacing standpoint at times, it is a little bit slower than I would actually like. I do think at times there could be a little bit of few scenes that could be actually cut. I also would have liked to really get more inside the killer's head, maybe get a little bit of backstory of him, like what is his past, how did he really grow up, certain things like that, because we don't really get a lot of time with the killer. He's just kind of there in this glass box, and we just see him very emotionless, but we don't really get too much inside his head or really know too much about him as a killer or just as an individual in himself. And then I wouldn't really say that I would call this a negative, but just more so something more so on the wish list. I wish we had a little bit more time in the courtroom, really hearing witnesses, statements, maybe learning about like the DNA, certain things that are really the juicy details and the meat of the investigation, which we really don't get a lot of because this is a character study. I also would have liked to see the jurors actually deliberate and actually see what decision they would actually make. Obviously, at the end of this film, we actually do get to see the decision and what actually happens and actually unfolds towards the end of this trial. But at the same time, it would have been really cool to actually see the jurors and actually see what their feelings actually were. Obviously, because I just did jury duty, and obviously I had to do a deliberation and actually decide someone's fate. So it'd be really interesting to see people's feelings and just how they really felt overall about the case, which obviously this film doesn't really dive into. So as far as a score for this film, I would give it a 3.5 out of 5. I think overall this is a film that is very interesting. I like the character study portion. It's shot well. I think the characters are pretty well developed, and it's very interesting to see a character really spiral out of control and really get obsessed with a case. So I think overall I would say that this film is definitely worth a watch. Definitely check it out. If you're into slower burn films, I think that you can really enjoy this for what it is. What did you guys think about Red Rooms? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Did you just think it was kind of meh? If you haven't checked it out yet, are you going to check it out when it comes to streaming or VOD? Leave any and all comments down below, and thank you guys for watching as always.